Rear Admiral Thomas J. Robertson, United States Navy, Commander, Submarine Groups 6 and 10.
And to Georgia, good afternoon to you all. This is precisely the day that we ordered, and we're very thankful. General Powell, Mrs. Powell, Admiral Kelso, Mrs. Kelso, Admiral Bacon, Mrs. Bacon, Admiral Childs, Mrs. Childs, Mayor Weiner, Mayor Dixon, Mayor Brandon, Admiral Jones, General Mrs. Krulak, Admiral Mrs. Red, distinguished guests, fellow flag officers, Captain Tom Moore, crew of Tennessee, and the families of USS Tennessee. Commissioner Manning, citizens of the volunteer state, Tennessee, Navy Leaguers and neighbors, South Georgia and North Florida, National President Charles Waddell, and the submarine veterans of World War II, our colleagues from the 24th Mechanized Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, people of Camden County, men and women of Submarine Group 10, and many, many friends of the Submarine Force. It's great having you here. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you to this ceremony commemorating more than 30 years of service spearheading the nation's strategic defense and keeping the peace. And indeed, it's wonderful to see the visible signs of support from our local community. City officials, county officials, 5 Navy League councils, educators, Chamber of Commerce, and ordinary citizens. And we thank you for being here, being with us, and being behind us, not just today, but every day. There are many organizations that have played vital roles in the sustained success of our strategic submarine program over the years. I'm happy to see representatives from many of those organizations here at this ceremony. Today, their legacy is carried on by proud sailors and the civilian professionals that comprise our Kings Bay community. Their dedication, their touch, their work is everywhere apparent on this base. When USS Tennessee moved out on that winter night to go out on patrol number 3000, that team stood solidly behind them, as that team has for the 2,999 patrols preceding that. And now, I join that team in welcoming USS Tennessee back home, if just for a little while. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our submarine force commander. During his distinguished career, he served in destroyers, attack submarines, and strategic submarines, Atlantic, Pacific, and the Mediterranean. During the mid-1970s, he studied at Oxford University in England as a CNO scholar. He commanded the attack submarine USS Gurnard with great success in the Pacific, and later commanded Submarine Squadron 3 in San Diego. As a flag officer, he commanded Naval Training Center, San Diego, directed Strategic Submarine Division in the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, and served as Assistant Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Undersea Warfare. From 1988 through 1990, he commanded Submarine Group 8 in Italy, directing Allied and U.S. submarine operations in the Mediterranean until he took his current assignment. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Commander Submarine Force, U.S. Atlantic Fleet, Vice Admiral Hank Childs.
General Powell, Admiral Kelso, Admiral Bacon, fellow flag and general officers, distinguished guests, men and women of the submarine force here in Kings Bay, and other people who have come from many miles for this occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, It's a pleasure to be here to celebrate this 3,000th patrol. And I'd like first to put it in perspective. By my calculation, 3,000 patrols equals 80,000 man-years submerged, an overwhelming amount of patriotism and dedication on behalf of the people who have sailed in these submarines. It's also some 6,000 goodbyes and homecomings. You know, that's a lot of honeymoons for those of you who have done this. And we all know we couldn't have achieved this record without the patriotism, enthusiasm, and the dedication of our families back at home. They've really been a mainstay for us. Magnificent during these past 31 years. And that represents a lot of familygrams too, which for those of you who may not be aware is the way our wives communicate with the men when they're submerged. And there's one I'd like to recount for you that goes something like this. The wine is on the chill, I am on the pill, have abstained since February, is Polaris really necessary? There've been a lot of other familygrams over the years too, but that one stands out, believe me. But this record of achievement couldn't have been done without the many men and women who work at our bases, on our repair ships, our logistics organization, the missile facilities, the Strategic Systems Project Office. It's all come together. And our submarines have been providing a strong deterrent at sea since that first SSBN, the USS George Washington, outlined in your program, departed for sea in 1960. And that patrol marked the successful union of two visionary ideas, Admiral Rickover's nuclear propulsion and Admiral Red Rayborn's idea of an underwater-launched ballistic missile. It produced a force that was then and is today invulnerable, highly survivable, and a reliable, stealthy force at sea. Our SSBNs and their missiles were designed to be terribly effective in war. But for over 30 years, they have been a most effective instrument of peace between the two superpowers of our time. And it's only fitting that the first ballistic missile submarine be named George Washington, because George Washington was the man who in 1790 stated, and I quote, "To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual ways of preserving the peace," unquote. Wise words then, wise words today. And the composition of our strategic force has evolved over the years from the 41 SSBNs of the 1960s, the late 1960s, with their older missiles, to the much longer range C-4 and D-5 Trident missiles that our submarines carry today. And so, as we speak, our force consists of 23 submarines, and it will shortly go to 18 Trident submarines by the end of this century as we commission 6 more of the Tridents and put the rest of our older SSBNs offline. There's been a lot of change. We're out of Holy Lock. We no longer make strategic patrols from Charleston. The tender is headed for the West Coast. The older submarines, many of them are now in mothballs, having accomplished their lifetime of deterrence. Boats with names like John Adams, Andrew Jackson, Lafayette, and of course, George Washington. And while our SSBN force is significantly smaller than it was in the old days of 41 for freedom, our technology is vastly superior, and the modernization of this force continues. We provide well over a third of our country's strategic warheads for less than 4% of the Navy's funds and 3% of its personnel. And whatever the future might bring in terms of modernization and technology, the real bedrock of our national security will continue to be made up of extraordinary men and women who make this force up. And if you looked at this black hull behind me, and you went through it and saw the machinery or the huge missile that it carries, you might be tempted to think of that technological marvel as really what makes up this force. But if you did, you'd be sorely misled, because it's really the people that makes that technology function. The operational experience and the unique talent of our submarine qualified officers and enlisted people represents an invaluable national resource to us. If lost, it couldn't be quickly replaced. You just can't get that experience overnight, and you can't build the readiness that goes into this kind of a strategic force. Even the aviator admirals have called our guys, our submariners, a national treasure. And believe me, they mean it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a real submariner, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Frank Kelso.
Thank you very much, Hank. It would be okay to do it from 60 on, I think. General Powell, Mrs. Powell, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's both a pleasure and an honor for Landis and I to be with you. I see so many old friends and shipmates. It makes me feel very good. I'm also pleased today. I know that many people have been recognized, and I would like to recognize one more, and that's Dan Talop, the CEO of Lockheed, because Dan, I would like you to represent all of the people in industry that have participated in this program for the over 30 years that it's been going on, because you certainly, all of you, have been a part of this program as well. Landis and I look forward to our visits down here. As many of you know, and some have said, we feel like we're with family when we're with Tennesseans, and I see Bill Manning and a few Tennesseans that I know pretty well. So Charlie Levine back there in the back, so it's great to be with you and all of the sub vets from Tennessee and this part of the country. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm also happy to be with the people from Kings Bay, South Georgia, Northern Florida, and St. Mary's. Since my son and daughter-in-law here are part of the residents, that we have a particular interest in you all, and we appreciate so much the way you treat our people and make us feel at home. This is a great day for submariners, but you don't have to wear dolphins or be a part of our Navy to appreciate the significance of what we are commemorating this afternoon. This is a milestone worthy of celebration by every American and everyone who loves peace. More than 3 decades ago, when we were at the height of the Cold War, as Hank said, the George Washington made the first Polaris patrol. The world we live in today is not the same one that existed at that time. As of last Christmas, the Soviet Union politically was dissolved. The ideas of communism are no longer relevant. The Cold War is clearly over. With a failed coup, we witnessed the ultimate validation of our national policies and were rewarded for determined efforts of many patriots over the past 45 years. We in the Navy are especially proud of the contributions of the Strategic Submarine Force, the crews like the Tennessee that have brought about and supported this welcome turn of events. None of this, of course, came easy, although it looks easy today. Less than 2 years after George Washington returned from that first patrol, President Kennedy remarked, "The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it." Bringing to fruition and maintaining the strategic submarine program has been costly in every sense of the word. It owes its success to men of vision like Arleigh Burke, Red Raymond, and Hyman Rickover, to the sacrifices of thousands of officers and men who have made the patrols, and the families who so staunchly support them. I noted that I think the one person has made 35 SSBN patrols. Think about that. Multiply that by 2 for 2 months of patrol, and that's 70 months. That's almost 7 years of his life underwater. That's quite an accomplishment. We owe people who are willing to serve like that an enormous debt, and particularly their families who support them. None of this would have happened without the support of our elected officials in Congress, a strong defense industry, and the determination of our American people. Since 1960, our strategic submarine sailors have carried out a vital role as caretakers of the most survivable element of America's nuclear deterrence. They have never forgotten the awesome implications of their mission, nor the fact that they literally safeguard the very existence of the nation. The vastly reduced threat of global war is their reward and our reward for countless hours of training, inspections, the long patrols, and separations from loved ones. But let us remember, we are celebrating a milestone in this significant program, not the end. We are at a promising juncture in history where the possibility for sustained peace seems within our grasp. But we must remember that the price for sustained peace is strength and vigilance. As long as any nation has the ability to threaten our country and our allies with nuclear weapons, we will need to maintain a strong nuclear deterrent. The reliability, survivability, and exceptional capability of our strategic submarine force will continue to be a key contributor to our nation's defense and peace in the world. Our leaders recognize this fact, and we are committed to maintaining a most capable submarine force. One of our nation's leaders, who is a believer in the value and importance of this program, is our next speaker. Most of us who serve in uniform are fortunate to do so in a relatively anonymous fashion, even if we're not so stealthy as those of you who sail our SSBNs. Our contributions are recognized and appreciated by the American people, by our family and friends. We are happy to serve as professionals behind the scene. But General Powell does not enjoy that luxury. He is very much a public figure in our land. He represents every one of us in uniform to the American people, and he takes this responsibility quite seriously. We could not ask for a finer representative. He is an outstanding role model for young people, and he does more for recruiting among all the services than any other single individual I could name. His outstanding leadership carried us through Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and continues to guide us as we proceed through these changing and very challenging times. I think I can speak for my fellow service chiefs when I say that it's a great privilege to be a part of his team. I especially appreciate General Powell and Alma joining us here today. Sir, you honor all who have served during the 3,000 patrols that we celebrate here this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce my good friend and a great patriot, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Admiral Kelso, for that most kind introduction. Indeed, Alma and I are very, very pleased to be with you this afternoon and to join the men and women of the submarine force and the commands who support them and all of the distinguished guests who are here to celebrate the return of Tennessee and her magnificent crew and to commemorate this 3,000th patrol. It's also a great delight to be back in Georgia and to be here in St. Mary's and Camden County, this wonderfully supportive Navy community. It also feels good to be back in my Navy suit These whites, I've got to tell you, have a long and honorable tradition of their own, but they come in especially handy for an Army chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff when he has to participate in a Navy ceremony at an old Army base. What an impressive sight Tennessee and her crew are behind us. I know a lot about Tennessee. She is the boat that our dear friend and the Navy's First Lady, Mrs. Landis Kelso, sponsored. She was the first boat to carry our new Trident D5 missiles. She was the first boat to arrive here in Kings Bay. Over 16,000 tons of power for peace. 2 football fields long, able to carry 24 missiles, built and maintained by superb American workers, manned by superb American sailors. There are many ways we Americans have devised to prevent war, and they have all played their roles successfully. The infantryman with his rifle in the field patrolling the wire, the pilot scrambling into his fighter to respond to an alert, the Marine honing his combat skills during landing exercises off an amphibious warship, the Coast Guardsman putting out to sea in his cutter. They each have their special job to do. They each make their special contribution, and they each require their special sacrifices. But no one has done more to prevent conflict. No one has made a greater sacrifice for the cause of peace than you, America's proud missile submarine family. You stand tall among all the heroes of the Cold War. To a soldier like me, sailors are different, wonderfully different. I never cease to be awed by the extraordinary dedication and devotion to duty shown by you who go down to the sea in ships in defense of your country. Routinely, for months on end, the sailor endures a brand of hardship that the rest of us in uniform seldom face. Separation, loneliness, deprivation, confinement. For the sailor on submarine patrol, the hardship is even greater. Not for you do the Liberty boats leave the ship for a foreign port call. Not for you do the replenishment ships come alongside. Not for you do the airplanes and helicopters land on board each day with their precious cargoes of mail and news from home. And if you, our sailors, and especially our submariners, are often so alone in your great work, you are never, never alone in your great sacrifice. This sacrifice you share with your families, with your parents, and with your wives, husbands and children waiting silently at the pier all those long, lonely months. How many children here today were born while Daddy was away at sea? So many wives here today who successfully managed jobs and households and family crises all by themselves. How many birthdays and anniversaries, graduations and school plays were missed all through the years. We owe a debt of gratitude to our sailors and to their families, and a special debt is owed to you who wear the dolphin so proudly on your chests. America's leaders place special trust and confidence in the members of their submarine force. You go to sea entrusted with weapons of incredible destructive power. You go to sea propelled by power plants of unbelievable sophistication. You go to sea armed for Armageddon, while charged with the solemn responsibility for preventing it. No other members of America's armed forces have been given so great a burden of responsibility as the men of the Ballistic Missile Submarine Force, and no other members of America's armed forces have so earned America's trust. Americans believe in and love their Navy, and Americans believe in trust and love their submarine force. It would be unimaginable for them to ever weaken that force, for you are as necessary to America's security in time of peace as you are in time of war. Today we are gathered to commemorate 3,000 SSBN patrols, 3,000 patrols for peace. As was mentioned, it was on a November day in 1960 that USS George Washington left Charleston on that first patrol. It was at the height of the Cold War. We were all on guard against a belligerent, nuclear-armed Soviet Union that had crushed rebellions in Eastern Europe and was causing trouble in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia. Fidel Castro had just taken over in Cuba. John Kennedy had just been elected president. I was a young lieutenant in Germany on my way out to my deterrent patrol position along the Iron Curtain. Our SSBN patrols continued as the Cold War continued. Berlin crises came and went. The Cuban Missile Crisis came and went. The Vietnam War came and went. Through it all, the men and women of the submarine force continued to sail their craft beneath the waves, deterring a Third World War that so often looked like it was threatening to break out and destroy us all. You did your job well. That terrible war we feared never came. And then, finally, at long last, things changed. As Mikhail Gorbachev's perestroika and glasnost permeated Soviet society, it created cracks and fissures that split forever that unnatural community and the artificial structures that held it together. The captive nations of Eastern Europe broke their rusty shackles. The long-suppressed Baltic republics declared themselves free. Borders opened. The Berlin Wall fell. Germany reunified. And last year, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the Cold War was over. It was indeed over, and America had won. We had won through the efforts of our sailors and Marines and Coast Guardsmen and soldiers and airmen who served and fought and died around the world for 45 years, and by America's civilian workers and the American people who supported us in uniform so superbly. Won most especially by you, America's blue crews and gold crews, manning America's nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine force, and won by all of you who sustained them, by the families and by the communities across America, like those represented here, who hosted and nurtured our men and women in uniform. Yet even with our Cold War victory, the boomers have continued their patrols. Why is this? Why, with the Cold War won, do the boats still go out? The answer is because freedom is still not free. Because America's security still must be protected. Because there are still thousands of nuclear warheads in Russia, in the Ukraine, in Belarus, in Kazakhstan. Warheads that, if ever launched, can still destroy America's cities and her way of life in half an hour. So however warm our relations may grow with the new former Soviet republics, however close our friendships become, we will always, always place our faith in our boomers and not in anyone else. The landmark patrol from which Tennessee has just returned will be followed by others. There are patrols out now, and there will no doubt be a ceremony here again a few years from now when the count reaches 4,000. Kings Bay, its family, and its new facilities will endure. And from other home ports, the intrepid attack boats will still deploy as well. The marvelous men and women of the submarine service will continue to wend their way silently through the watery depths. And the families of those who go out must continue to wait, the pages of their lives still turning, while their loved ones serve beneath the waves. So we stand here today on this important day, in this great place, before this mighty warship and its crew. We lift up our faces and our hearts from the waters around us to the heavens above. And we ask God's blessings on us all, on those of us who are leaders, that we may always make our decisions with wisdom, on those of us who are workers, that we may always provide our support with skill, on those of us who are family members, that we may always endure our separation with courage, and most of all, on those of us who must go down to the sea in ships, that we may always conduct our patrols with dedication, and that we may always safely return home again, to this base, to our loved ones, to this beloved country that God has blessed and we are proud to call America. Thank you very much.